All right, thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm going to talk into the mic because I think there's an audio, but I don't really want to talk into the mic, but we'll make it work. Um, I passed out, and there might be a few copies left. I passed out our recent annual report, and I think you guys will find that pretty neat because there is an article in there on Ryan and Carrie Merck and the Paw Paw Festival. So, and you'll notice that we have a Paw Paw flower on the front, and no, that was not taken at their farm, but we found it on stock photo. So the fact that pawpaws are on stock photo, that's good. All right, so what am I going to talk about today? Hi, I reckon, is that Maggie? Margie, nice to see you again. It's been a while. So I'm here among friends. We know Rick Huffman really well because our office was actually at Earth Design for a number of years. So when I first started working at Trees Upstate, Rick was our man, and he was like the Yoda in the side room. Like our room was here, he was in there, and if you didn't walk too fast, he'd catch you, and then he'd tell you maybe 30 minutes about some kind of plant or something that was going on. And I remember nothing. I will say I do not know Latin names of plants, so you guys know more about trees than me in terms of that. So what I will do, what I will talk about is I think the story of trees. Okay, so we can kind of relax. I did not bring a PowerPoint. You're like, what? How could you not bring a PowerPoint? It's trees. People want to see leaves. You won't. You guys would love it if I like did a quiz, right? We played a game. Like, who knows what kind of leaf that is? Like I didn't make a game. I'm sorry. I just thought about it when I got here. I'm like, this crowd, that would have been perfect. Like two teams. Who guesses the name of the whatever? Like, sorry. I know you guys are just wishing they had that, but instead you have me just telling stories. So the tree planting movement in America. That's what I want to talk about, because what I want to do is I want to sort of bring together what you guys do with the Native Plant Society and where you find yourself in the world, in the conservation preservation world, and where trees kind of intersect with that. And I've gotten kind of nerdy on this. Well, not on plants and trees. I know I'm not nerds of plants and trees like you guys are. So, but I've gotten nerdy on this idea of the Arbor Day holiday. Okay. So back in 1872, the first Arbor Day was held in Nebraska, technically Nebraska City. Okay. So that day, I think that day they say there was 1 million trees planted across Nebraska in 1872. Let's put it in perspective a little bit. What had happened just before 1872? How many of you guys are from South Carolina originally? And how many are you transplants? Okay, I think this should be the South Carolina Native Transplant Society. Everyone here is transplants, right? Okay. I don't even know what that means. It went over my head, but I've heard the word maybe from you before. All right. So a lot of you guys are from South Carolina. Maybe some of you guys are from up north, from down south. What had just happened before 1872? The Civil War, right? We saw the most violent war between North and South. And during this time, we say from the time of the Pilgrims, pretty much, America had, through manifest destiny, had marched across the country, killing buffalo, every buffalo they saw, cutting down every tree they saw. Now, when I was a young kid, I thought the forest that I lived in, we had some woods. We had about 14 acres of woods. I thought that's what the forest was supposed to be. That's what I grew up with. And I didn't know till I moved out west. I spent some time in California that, oh, wait a minute, South Carolina, where's the old growth forest? Yeah, and some of you guys may say, well, there's a little bit down in Congaree National. There's some in Joyce Kilmer. There's a tulip poplar old forest in Joyce Kilmer. But the trees I grew up with were scrappy. Now that I look back, they're nothing like what they could have been. Okay. But that was America. That was the spirit of America. We're going to march across and we're going to use everything we can to build our economy and to prove to the world that we are who we say we want to be. The hubris, the constant, like, using the natural resources. All of this was part of the thing that led up into the Civil War. The egos, all the stuff you can think And so now the wars happen. What is it? Something like 600,000 dead. The land's ravaged, right? And then just 7 years later, you have Arbor Day. You know, we go a little bit back before the Civil War. I think it was 1854 is when Walden Pond, or also called Life in the Woods, was written by why am I blanking on his name? Thoreau. Right. So Thoreau had written this, but also in 1854 there was a young whippersnapper named Julius Sterling Morton who was in college. And he got kicked out of college for going against the administration. He's kind of a rebel rouser kind of guy, a zealot. And he grew up in New York, that actually where he grew up in the 1850s actually had tree ordinances and rules around trees in New York, if you can believe it. He was one of the few places in America where he grew up that actually thought about trees and preserving trees. And so he wants to make a name for himself, and he can't do it in New York because there's just too many people, too many politicians, too many whatever. So he packs his family up and they move to Nebraska City, which is on the border of Iowa and Nebraska. Not in the middle of the state, but it's on the side of the state that receives about 15 inches of rain a year. Okay, so he moves over to this area, and he gets there, and he realizes the first thing he realizes is that I miss trees. You know, you think about a place like that, and you've got settlers coming across. Anytime they could find a tree, they would have cut it down because you could either build a house or a wagon wheel or whatever it was, right? So he comes and there's no trees. And so he starts planting trees. He gets buckets. I don't know if he had his sons helping or, but as the story goes, he probably said he did it himself, right? But he gets buckets and pulls out of the river and waters these trees, and he starts building this place for himself. And he gets so into it. He's a former newspaper guy, so he's really good at communications. He gets so into it and then he decides that I'm going to make this a big deal. Now he's also wanting to be governor. Why else move to Nebraska for this? But this is kind of his big event. So he gets the legislature. This is before he was governor, but he gets the legislature involved and said, we're going to make the first day. And then there's an argument. We don't know whether to call this day, and you'll like this, Rick, because you like big words. We don't know whether to call this day Sylvan Day, which means woods, or Arbor Day, which means tree in Latin. And so, they argue it out, and the Arbor Days win because they say it rolls off the tongue better, right? So instead of Sylvan Day, you have Arbor Day. So he starts this event. He was someone also who's kind of torn by the North-South issue, but the speeches that these guys gave, you go back in there and it's not part of the narrative. You can't say Wikipedia what was going on here. The speeches these guys gave was one of, we are planting a tree because we have a hope for tomorrow. Okay. So they had looked at this world being torn apart, all the trees cut down, and we can rebuild it. And what are we going to do it through? We're going to do it through the planting of trees. Okay. So they had big words, fancy balls. I think 10 years later, Cincinnati had 50,000 people at their Arbor Day celebration. They shot a gun up in the air and people raced to see who could plant the most trees in a day. Right. So this was like a big deal. Like Arbor Day was a big deal. And by 1896, which is only 24 years later, every state in the US except Delaware. Yeah. Delaware, except for Delaware, had their own state Arbor Day. Okay. So the event, it caught fire. And what I think is going on here is you have these two intractable forces. You think of 1872, 7 years after the Civil War, and you've got Reconstruction, and there's a lot of people who are still saying we're going to go back to war. War is still going to happen. We're still so far apart, right? But then we come up with a holiday that kind of goes across the nation that says, no, we're going to do something that thinks about the future and says that the future we have, we're going to plant better than what we have today. Okay? So it's incredible to think of it that way. That Arbor Day was, in some ways, whether they said it or not, it was a unifying force that anybody, no matter where you're at in the politics, could say, yes, I believe in that. I believe in planting that tree. So 1896 comes around, and, as legislatures do, things get a little bit stale. You don't have big parties. You're not firing off a gun and having people running off to see who can plant the most trees. Although in this area, that might be a good marketing move. Guns and trees. I mean, if it might work, you know, if you're a communication person, can work on that. But anyway, so what happens is you have this generation that didn't really grow up around the Civil War, and the idea of what is education starts changing a little bit. And so there's this move to say, you know, why are we sitting in a desk, getting our hands slapped just for moving or talking, and having to do all these, like, we're going to study Latin, we're going to study all these things. What if education could also be something that you did outside? Okay. So the schools quickly adopted Arbor Day as like their day. And so schools across America in all these different states, even though there's not a national Arbor Day at this point, right? It's just state and local, it's state legislatures that are doing it. The schools take it on as their thing, and it explodes. It goes farther than even the legislatures have done. Okay. So you've got Julius Sterling Morton. I always want to call him the guy that went across Africa, so I'll get it Morton Stanley, something anyway. So Julius Sterling Morton, he I lost my train of thought there. I'm sorry. I was going somewhere with that. Yeah, it was schools, but there was another one. I'm trying to catch it. I'm trying to catch it. D2. I'm sorry. No, it's cool.
Teaching outside.
Yeah, the idea of teaching outside was huge. I'm just going to keep going on that, and we'll leave Mr. Morton for a while. Now, one interesting thing about Mr. Morton is if you've ever had Morton salt, that was his son. Okay. So, or Argo cornstarch, that was his other son. So that's kind of neat to think of. And if you've heard of what's considered one of the best arboretums in the nation, it's called Morton Arboretum. That was his son who started the salt company, who had a lot of money and made a really fancy arboretum in Chicago that was still used as one of the standards of what an arboretum should be. Oh, so I know where I was going. So you've got Thoreau, you've got Emerson, you've got these different, what they call transcendentalist thinkers, and they and all the way maybe take it to John Muir and Muir Woods out in California. And they start to see trees and nature as probably more of a spiritual or a mystical experience, right? And so you've got this movement of like hugging the trees, loving the trees are us. I'm not saying those are their words, but you've got this going on about the same time you have Arbor Day going on. Well, Morton looks for an opportunity to do tree planting across the nation. He actually becomes the first commissioner of the USDA. Okay. And he pairs timber and forestry as something the government can do to plant more trees while also planting trees in urban areas. And so that's kind of where we're at even in America today. Like when you think of like forestry and the big tracts of land, it's a crop, right? But it's also trees and does provide a benefit as well. That's not the trees that Trees Upstate plants, but you get the idea. So you have a spiritual move. And then I think maybe you guys would know better than me, but like the 50s and 60s, there's more of an ecological change. You know, 1950s, 1960s, we're thinking of things in ecosystems and how they interact with one another. And that's where I think places like the Native Plant Society would come from, because I don't know your history, but I would think you come from this belief in how everything interacts, the trees, the plants, the animals, the water, all of it. So that's where I was going with that. Schools take this on. How many of you guys, you could just raise your hand, planted a tree when you were in school on a school day?
So create your own recipe, get your mise en place in place, and get.
That's not me, but I forget.
All right. Somebody's got a recipe for us. Did y'all hear that, or I just heard it here? They were talking about a recipe. So
Okay, you're good. Go.
So most of you guys had your hands up. You planted a tree on Arbor Day. How many kids do you think planted a tree on Arbor Day today? We don't plant any trees with them. I don't know of any that do it. It's, you know, as a holiday, it's kind of like, it's been around for a while. You know, we'll do other things. I mean, outdoor education is part of classrooms, but the actual tree planting that we did, I remember doing it as well when I was in third grade. The actual tree planting is something that's not done anymore, right? So there might be a little disconnect. And one of the things I hear from volunteers who've led our education programs, and you guys know this, is, well, the standards are so full that we've got to teach to the standards. Going out for a whole day and planting some trees is not in the standards, right? So, but that happened as well back in the turn of the century. So 2003 comes around, and Greenville is experiencing a high growth. Right, you guys know it more than me. I wasn't here in great. Actually, I was graduating from Clemson, but I don't remember the growth thing. I wasn't paying attention to that at the time. High growth starts happening, and a lady named Mary Lou Jones, you guys know her. She founded Friends of Paris Mountain State Park. She gets 12 of her friends together. They start the park at the time had potholes in the roads, that sort of thing, and they raise money to save the park, to make it something that we could experience so that people can be closer to nature. She was a biology teacher and always wanted to connect people with nature. Well, Mary Lou has 4 kids, and they live on Paris Mountain, right? I think off of Lake Circle, if you're interested with the area. So yeah, you know that area. So Mary Lou lives off the mountain. They didn't live there when they were little kids, but when they were in high school, they moved there. And she has 4 kids. 3 are kind of outgoing, and one's the shy type. She's would rather be among the trees and in nature than be doing all the crazy stuff that the other kids was doing. There's probably some folks who can relate to that in the room. And so what I've done is I have brought a children's book. So if you guys want to help pass these out. You've already got them? Somebody already passed them out. I'll take them. And instead of learning about Latin names tonight, you're gonna listen to a children's story. Which is kind of cool, right? Yeah. All right, so let's read this together. This is a fictionalized story of Katie. Her name's not in here, but it's a little girl who wants to save the trees in a land called Treelandia. And you get to take these home. You don't have to even donate. Once upon a tree near the blue and green mountains in a place called Treelandia, there was a daughter who lived on a mountain and loved nature. A naturally quiet soul, she would often escape to the forest when her more rambunctious sister and 2 brothers upset her calmness. As the years passed, she ventured farther and farther into the forest until one day she came upon an unusual tree with many different shaped and colored leaves. The tree and she immediately became friends of the sort that others, had they known about the friendship, would have found it a bit strange. Since she was forced by her parents to do normal daughter stuff like go to school, she couldn't be with the tree nearly as much as she wanted. One day, a pesky red-headed woodpecker came along and made a big hole in the trunk of the tree. I know that's not the size of a woodpecker hole, so you don't have to tell me later. It's a children's book, okay. Shocked that her tree friend had suffered damage, she took a cup and attached it to a small twig with a string. She placed the twig in a hole and held the cup to her ear. It was in this way she learned to listen to the tree. The daughter grew up and became an elementary art teacher. Her life was busy and she spent less time with the tree until she stopped seeing it altogether. But far from ignoring trees, she would take her school children into the nearby woods to paint trees so that they could learn to listen to them as well. For a moment, life seemed perfect in this perfect land of trees and hills. People from other places heard about this perfect place, decided to move there, and began building houses. With the increased number of houses came more children. The school cut down trees to build a bigger school. Her students could no longer go into the woods to paint trees. The daughter was sad. Her mother worried about her and asked her to hike with her in the woods. The mother, who had secretly known of the spectral tree, brought the daughter to its now distressed branches and plain-looking leaves. She called the tree the giving tree because not only had it given messages to the daughter, but the tree gave the mother a better relationship with the daughter. The mother reached in her backpack and pulled out a cup attached to a twig and a string. The daughter laughed. Listening to a tree was fine when she was young, but now that she was an adult, it seemed silly. She looked up at the branches and stood still as a falling leaf landed on her nose. The mother said, "It's a sign. The tree wants to talk. Just try it." How many of you guys heard a tree talk? I was just curious. Okay. Yeah, there's one. There usually is one. Hesitantly, the daughter stuck the twig in a hole in the tree and the cup to her ear. The tree spoke. The daughter began to cry. The mother wrapped her arms around her as the daughter listened in the cup. "I'm losing leaves," said the tree. "Each time a forest is lost to build 1,000 houses, I lose another leaf." A second leaf fell onto the shoulder of the mother. The tree spoke again. "Please speak for me, and they will listen." The daughter stood before the elders and spoke for the tree. "Please stop cutting down so many trees," she said with strong feelings. "We are losing our green spaces that make our land such a perfect place to live." Most of the elders didn't listen because they wanted more people and buildings and didn't care about trees. She thought the tree said they would listen to her, but the elders did nothing. Next, they went to the neighbors on the mountain for help. The neighbors also loved trees and agreed to help start a group to plant and protect more trees. One neighbor, a famous landscape artist who could also hear the trees, that's Dabney Peoples, if any of you are asking, joined them. As people built houses, he worked with them to build their own personal forests. He planted trees in their yards like a painter uses a brush. Over the years, the people in the houses fell more in love with trees. It was a good effort, but it wasn't enough. The man and the daughter decided to meet again at the giving tree to seek answers. When they arrived, they saw that the tree had fallen over, bless you, and the leaves were gone. Years earlier, the tree had told the daughter that it would never leave her. Yet here it was, without leaves and lying on the ground. Then the man put his ear to the tree. He heard a faint voice. "Bring my trunk and branches to them. Have them give to restore my leaves." They listened and sent invitations to friends to join them for a party at a new home that was built around an enormous magnolia tree that the community had loved for years. Friends came from miles around to see the magnolia tree in the new home. Symphony musicians played instruments throughout the garden. Neighbors and friends brought gifts to restore the leaves and plant more trees. Each time they gave, a new magic leaf was placed on the tree with each guest's name written on the leaf. We actually had an event where we did this, so that's kind of where it comes from. The kids don't need to know that. The tree began to fill up with leaves. Treelandia began to heal. From this point forward, more leaves were planted than were cut down. Seth, that actually looks more like you than it does Dabney. The daughter's heart was happy. She went back to teaching art at the school that was now surrounded by new trees that were planted by the group that she, her mother, and their neighbors started. Okay, so that is Once Upon a Tree. Katie used to play at one of her grandparents' house, and she would actually play telephone with a twig and a rope attached to a, like she was playing telephone in the woodpecker holes in a tree. But I'm thinking, so Katie, an elementary art school teacher, she's the person who started, at the time it was called Trees Greenville, or now Trees Upstate. She started Trees Greenville. Someone who's kind of a quiet soul, not the kind you would think that goes out starting organizations. She wasn't retired, and this was her nonprofit that she was going to create, right? So this is somebody who, because she recognized that because the trees were getting cut down, it was stealing her peace. That was the impetus. That's what made her do it. Now, she had Mary Lou's example of starting Friends of the Paris Mountain State Park, but it was about this, and it was about this. And that's what we're starting to miss, okay? So you guys know it. You live here. You love plants. You see what's happening with development. So I think it's almost important that it was Katie, that it was an elementary art teacher that started us versus some other organization. We went to Trees Atlanta. They've been around since the time of the Olympics in Atlanta in the early 90s. And they had an organization that took Atlanta from not having many trees to having much more. I think in that annual report, there's a little chart you'll see that shows that our area is not as green as we like to think it might be. The county of Greenville has about 39% tree canopy coverage. The city of Greenville about 36%. City of Spartanburg about 39%. Travelers Rest doing a little better. I think you're around 48%, something like that. Atlanta and Charlotte, 45% tree canopy coverage. There's a higher percentage of tree canopy coverage in Atlanta and Charlotte than there is here in Greenville, Spartanburg. And I know Anderson's probably next on the list with the amount of development that's going on there. One thing that an organization like ours can do, because we're not lobbyists, is we can be the friendly face of trees. We can work with corporations to come plant more trees. We can be a friend adjacent, I don't know what you describe it, to development, to say we just want to get more trees in the ground, while at the same time working on any policy that might come up or any kind of like ordinances that we might be able to help with. But we're building a tree movement, right? We're making something happen. I think it was 2 years ago, we found out how many acres of woods were permitted in Greenville County to be cut down. So like it was not an official number that someone took the number. But we found that we took the acreage, how many trees are on an acre. It was about, we lose about 400,000 trees a year in Greenville County. Okay. This takes me back to the founding of Arbor Day. And one of the things that Morton said was that until you lose sight, you don't realize how precious sight is. Until you lose your hearing, you don't understand the beauty of being able to hear sounds. And he said, and so it was with these treeless plains that the Pilgrims had demolished, that we finally realized the importance of planting trees. And I think we're in that kind of thing once again. We're kind of in that same world once again, where someone like Katie starts Trees Greenville, where you guys are interested in native plants and native trees, like because of what we're losing. Okay. But we all know it seems a little bit late. Not a lot's being done. But what I love about the example, rather than saying, oh, bad, oh, Greenville, bad. No, look, Atlanta, Charlotte, they had a huge, like, they had problems, right? It was called Hot Atlanta for many reasons, but one was because it was so much concrete. And they made a difference. They stepped up. They made different kind of like ordinances, and they had a huge organization that's out there planting trees all the time. They have like 50 staff as far as Trees Atlanta. Okay. And then Charlotte actually worked with a municipality and got money from this municipality and the nonprofit, and they're doing great things there. Those didn't happen by chance, and they can still happen here. Okay. If they could do it, we can do it. You know, we've got probably more land to do it on, right? But it's going to take work, and you guys know that, and you're doing some of that good work. So what's Trees Upstate doing? If I'm on an elevator, which there's not many elevators around here, but if I'm on an elevator, we plant trees, right? We're very close to what the Arbor Day Foundation is. The Arbor Day Foundation wasn't founded until 1972, and that might be one of the reasons that schools don't do it anymore. I'm not sure. But because it's kind of been professionalized and they do a lot of community tree plantings, probably planting more trees than we even did when we did it in schools, but it's become more of an organization than it was a holiday at one point. So we plant trees, we promote trees, we protect trees, we focus on parks, schools, and neighborhoods. Sometimes we have a workforce development crew that we're also teaching to get jobs and plant trees, have a lot of community events, and we raise money to plant more trees. It's pretty simple, but you guys know it can also be very complex. Like just the other day, we were planting in Brutontown, which is a neighborhood right above North Main, a low to moderate income neighborhood. when we first started planting in Bruton Town, tree canopy coverage there was somewhere around 21%. We've planted over 400 trees there, and now it's over 45%, right? So we can make a difference in neighborhoods, and that's kind of what we do. I'm also interested in more of our trees becoming native. It's something that we really look at. I've chatted with Martin Hamilton, and Martin, what trees should we be planting? It is tricky because sometimes you cannot find. We give away 5,000 trees a year, and most of them are native. But there are times where it's like that's all that's in stock, right? But we want to do more of that. We're committing to how can we. Rick's talking to us about seed collection. How do we get trees to come in and go back out? So that's one of the things we do. So we also run the Turkey Day race. So that's a big fundraiser for us. So we always need volunteers for that. And then there's always opportunities to plant trees. If you don't want to plant trees, you can come hand out donuts and coffee to our volunteers who do. But we are very thankful for the relationship we have with the Native Plant Society, and for Rick being our friend. And Ryan and Carrie actually hosted one of our fundraising tours. So we have a club, Seth's in it. We have a club that meets 3 times a year and goes and tours trees, just with the idea that if you're going to care about it, you got to get close to it, right? Proximity to something is what is going to bring you, what is going to make it more important for you. So we want to bring trees to people. We want people to see what can be possible in an urban environment. We don't plant forestry tracts. We do some stream bank restoration. Like we work with Melanie Ruhlman at Save Our Saluda, and we work with her to plant some trees as part of their projects. And some stream bank restorations. We work with municipalities, and our goal is not just let's get trees in the ground, but every time we plant a tree, we teach people the proper way to do it. And we always like to say 90% of landscapers, which is no surprise to you guys, but 90% of landscapers do it incorrectly. And many of our trees are dying right after people are on the hook for replacing them. In the warranty of a year, that's when the trees go, right? So our subdivisions are just like woefully under canopied. Even if at one time they had the one tree in the front yard, a lot of those, maybe 30% of those trees have just died because they weren't planted correctly or taken care of. So there's all these different things that we do, and we like partner with other organizations. And I think is now a good time for questions, or what do you think? Don't ask me too many hard questions, please. No, not Ryan. Not Ryan. Margie.
Grade classes, and kids were, so when they talk about trees, kids came up with the most beautiful poems, stories, posters, even like songs they write, and now we're not allowing them to. But it was a wonderful program, and I don't know how we could get back in there. I mean, I know a couple of teachers that lessons in, but and we're getting ready for Arbor Day at South. So anybody who wants to celebrate Arbor Day, come on down to South. 11 o'clock.
We're going to be in Spartanburg, so we've got 18 organizations coming together to do something for Arbor Day in Spartanburg. So that's one of our areas with that, and this is South Carolina Native Plant Society. So I'm sure you guys cover Spartanburg. It's in South Carolina, right?
Yeah.
I think it is. I think it is.
State covers a lot of ground.
Do you really have a question?
Yeah. What was wrong with Delaware?
What was wrong with Delaware?
Why did they hold up? Not have their Arbor Day.
Who's a historian? I don't know.
Too much money.
Too much money? I don't know. Yeah.
So I moved here from California a couple of years ago. And one thing that struck me was the amount of kudzu around.
Mhm.
What effect does that have on the tree? I see it climbing up the trees and it looks like it's killing them.
Yeah, it does kill them.
Is there more being done to try to eradicate kudzu? I just see it everywhere.
when we do when we do like a neighborhood planting where we're saying we're gonna, we call it transforming neighborhoods, we're gonna, we're gonna take this neighborhood that's low to moderate, we will do a little bit of invasive removals. That's only a small piece. I know this is a squirrely issue, and there are people out there that have been fighting it for years and years and years, and I don't know, so.
Plant trust. We spray every. You usually spray, we spray. That's big area. Can't do it. Spray, I guess August. Spray, you know, it'll be spray August. Right. Going down. There is a really part of it.
Well,
So it's body. It's just pervasive thing. You can only take it on the surface. You have some park or something like that. Take it on smaller scale like that. Big buttercup.
what's that, Rick?
Big buttercup,
Big buttercup?
big buttercup. And so it's a little plant, it's about this big, it's all in the floodplain. We spent about just plant that. And but we have an opportunity to stop that one before it switches. And once they get to a certain point, it's hard to get them back. And many plants not even Frank, project chair, like up here in travel dress, blackbird, herb. We've got a lot of attention, trivet pulling and that kind of.
I have seen Frank Holloman with an extractor gator in his hand, pulling Chinese privet.
Yeah. Everybody talked to see according to the trees, and it chokes the trees too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Until our Lord's house, we brought in goats. And the goats ate all, and then we would treat and dig out.
Mhm. Yeah, it's.
Like California, where it's goats, brand, and
Mhm.
take. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, goats are wonderful. It's such
Well,
a natural way to do it as well.
There are, I've been around. And they can be good. If they are free products. First, they eat everything. They eat all the day.
Yeah.
Secondly, they will not eliminate most of the stuff. What they will do, is, for example, a neighbor is struggling to get rid of the child. They will not do it. They will eat the foliage. Then you have to pull it. So some people think they're cute. And the third thing, is, no matter how good they will get out. Will do something. So you gotta use them carefully. And for the right recognize what good they do. But they are great at clearing up. That's the work. I just totally. You say, then you can go.
The city of lost a good percentage of its canopy during the last hurricane. And the mayor said they're gonna plant more trees. They weren't gonna plant oaks because you saw how shallow the roots were. Well, I don't know of any mature tree that doesn't have shallow roots because that's where they feed. If he, as the city asked for advice,
So I can speak to that a little bit. Then I'm gonna repeat the question. I don't know if you could hear me through.
That thing doesn't.
Oh, I'm talking to the computer and here I was. The whole time. All right, so give you a little background. So we lost a tremendous amount of trees. Okay, so we probably lost just as many trees as they did in Western North Carolina. All right, and in terms of debris collection, more tree debris collection happened in just like Greenville alone or Spartanburg alone than it did in Western North Carolina. All right, so that doesn't tell you how many fell, but it does tell you we had a serious problem. We had 16 counties affected through the repeat the question. The question was about the trees that fell down, and specifically on oaks, and is it smart to plant oaks because a lot of them fell down. So obviously we know this was hopefully a once in a lifetime, unfortunately probably not a once in a lifetime experience based on what's going on, but you had a microburst of water that came in a couple of days earlier, especially in the city of Greenville. It had been dry before then. The viscosity on the roots like made it like pudding, almost call it like pudding. And the white oaks themselves were in full foliage and also had fruit, and it was a really good harvest that year for an amount of things. So they acted as big wind sails when we did get the 60 to 70 mile per hour winds, and so a lot of white oaks did come down. The roots on a white oak, if the white oak had been pruned, it had a much better chance. Like we saw trees that had been pruned over their lifespan did a lot better than trees that didn't, but you can't say that that's the only thing that works. One of the things they're doing, yes, white oaks might look like they have a shallow. So someone would say, okay, if you look in Charleston and you looking at a root system in Charleston and they go really far out, you're like, wow, those roots are so much better. Well, they're in a different type of soil, and research tells us that doesn't make them better for wind, right? So the clay is a harder soil. It can actually a lot of times hold in more. Then you have the issue of like trees next to each other can hold each other down, and they do better than trees that are by themselves, right? Another thing, Scott Crossan at Schneider Tree Care, who's been on our board for a while, he is recommended to some clients that they apply a root growth to the roots so that the tree focuses more on having a strong root base. The other thing is, especially in urban trees, you're next to like a sidewalk, a street, and that root ball does not reach out. Or if it's in someone's yard, it may have been watered every day of its life, and the roots were never taught to go out looking for water. So they stay close, and the root ball becomes much smaller, and wind comes in, it falls right down. So there's all this like things we learn about trees when this happens. It was shocking. I think Frank, you lost like what, 19 white oaks? Is that what you told me? Yeah. So you were the first person to tell me that the amount of trees that came down were mostly white oak, and I hadn't heard that till you.
Everybody knows the University of Georgia professor, who's written Brain Nature Home. Big he said if you just want to do one thing, plant. He must get his tank. Well,
I think the white oak, isn't it like 600 species of butterflies and moths feed off of the white oak? I mean, it's incredible. So I would differ with the assessment to not plant oaks. The other side of that, though, is when we're going out into neighborhoods and we're offering free trees to people who can't afford them, if they don't want an oak, we're like, okay, here's your red bud. We got you something. And that's the only way they'll take a tree, right? I have no idea. At least 7. No, I mean, it's probably 1,000, right? 30. Ryan knows all their Latin names. Yes, Seth.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Yeah.
Your comment earlier about the percent tree canopy,
Mhm.
different places. There's a poster on the wall, permanent, the sign that got a lot more detail about
Mm.
it. Apparently the students and professors.
Oh, wow, I'd love to see that.
Use both sensing and GIS to do some of this comparing, but I don't know if they've done it over time, but they definitely done it.
Yeah. And so the comment by Seth was about how Furman University is doing a lot of GIS data and canopy searching. So the canopy mapping is done by flyovers, and it used to be done by the NOAA, I think. I'm not quite sure, but it was done by that. And people research it and look at it different kind of ways. It does cost money to do that. And we're just now in the state of South Carolina, a lot of cities are reaching out to say, what's our canopy percentage? And it's difficult unless you go find like a science book that showed, here's how many trees were in America in 1690. Here's how many, like there's some really cool charts that shows that we've lost like 2/3 of our trees. But to know your area and what you've lost, the data may have not been taken or analyzed even 10 years ago. Right. And that's something we're doing, and we're encouraging other municipalities to do, is to, look at the tree canopy percentage. You can't tell when you are in a forest or you're in a wooded area, it feels like you got a lot of trees. And when there's no trees, you feel like, oh my gosh, there's nothing here. Right. We can't see unless we have that bird's eye view. Yes, sir.
I lost sweet gum and pop,
Mm,
and in some cases, I just lost the top.
wow.
And it would just take, in fact, I've got one that it took the top out of it, and it's hung up in another tree, and it's been there since Helene came through. Where other places I've been able to do the maintenance,
Yeah.
but I lost sweet gums and even a few persimmon.
Mm, yeah. I think all trees, something happens to at least one of them.
It's hard to paint the broadwood wire.
Yeah. That was the surprise.
Yeah.
Because they're the grandfather of the forest, some people call them, and why would the grandfather fall? But yeah, it's like different species. Some places had more tornado kind of things. Some of the data that was actually out there on tree failure only considers it a tree falling if the tree snaps, not if the root ball comes up. So you're comparing apples and oranges to some of those other storms that are out there. And we've looked at like a list of what are some trees that are like super trees. If somebody's worried about that, I would encourage you not to be thinking about the tree's going to fall when you plant it. If you're not worried, just plant it a little bit farther from the house, right? But there's a good chance it's going to be there, and especially if you take care of it. So you had a question a long time ago.
Scott asked, can you give details on what your youth training program is doing in the community and how that works? I saw this on the website. Are they employed or training to become employed? I think this would be a great way to increase tree planting.
Yeah, so the question is, what are we doing? Trees Upstate, what are we doing our youth training? I'd say, basic, before we get into that, basic, a lot of young people come to our plantings and plant trees, and we make them go through the process, right? So we've had over 12,000 volunteers since Katie founded the organization in 2005, and people get to plant a tree and they watch how to do it. So there is some experience there. The question is more about our workforce development program, and that is a very difficult program. Right now, we are working with some of our high schoolers through what's called Launch GVL, which is through the Business Chamber of Greenville, and they send us some folks out there, and they do wraparound services with them and teach them how to be, functioning adults while we are training them in the skill, which is tree planting or tree care, right? So we do that a little bit. We've had full-time tree crews that are workforce development, and I say of the 8 people that we've graduated through that program, 4 of them are still in landscaping, but they're not in the tree industry. We've had some challenges getting people to work in the tree industry for various reasons, just not being a good fit, or the different demands of climbing up in the tree versus, doing things like cutting grass. So it's something we really want to figure out. There was a huge movement just 2 years ago with $1.4 billion in funding from the government was going towards community forestry. And a large portion of that was for workforce development. And all that has been since gone. We didn't get any of those grants. We're not funded by any federal grants, so we didn't get hurt by it as much, but we were going for those grants and we wanted to do more around the youth training. But it is a skill that, people want to learn. So maybe one day we'll figure it out or hopefully partner with another organization who does it really well. But for now, we've just got a couple kids that we're running through it.
Can you talk about like policy or ordinances or like what's being done at the government level to like towards trying to recover the how is Trees Upstate facilitate that?
That's the can of worms, right? The question was about policy, procedure, ordinances. Rick probably knows more about the ordinances than I do. I spent a little time with them, but they, City of Greenville is doing a better job than they were in the past. There's what they call fee in lieu of in the city where they get funds when developers cut down trees. And so I think for each property up to, is it 25,000? They may have changed the numbers, but at least for some unit of housing, it's 25,000 is the most they can charge someone to cut down trees. That money goes into a pot. It can fund like the arborists of the city, and we do receive some funds to plant in low to moderate income areas, which has become more difficult since the hurricane. Less people want trees. We were told by the Arbor Day Foundation, give it about 3 years for these neighborhoods to see the value of trees again, and kind of the memory's not there as much anymore. So the City of Greenville, we look at ordinances and we have a team. I'm not on that team. It's going to be people that are either arborists themselves, master arborists, city planners, folks that have been on our board in the past, and they'll look through and say, well, I think, and we'll have like landscape designers. I think Holly Owens, who worked with Rick for a while, she's really big into that and she provides advice. So we're listening to the development community, but also like what is possible. And so we'll say, we like this, you should check it out, but we will not lobby and take the council people out to dinner and say, I think you could do a little more trees, right? So that's kind of the part we play. We want to stay the friendly face of trees. And that way people across the political spectrum will support us and plant trees because I think everyone loves it. Spartanburg's got some efforts right now where they're going to relook at their ordinance and get more in place. Sometimes the ordinance is not the problem, it's the enforcement, right? So you can have I think even Greenville County has some ordinance around trees, but there's no one enforcing it. So they're kind of doing what they want. There is a guy now, he's the first ever county arborist. I hope he still has his job. I haven't talked to him in a couple of months. But he's thinking, well, how can when people are cutting down all these trees and they're not supposed to, what can I do? Straight out of college. He probably needs a gun on him, honestly. Like he needs to be a law enforcement official with some of these sites because there are some bad people out there who, whatever, I'll cut it down anyway. If it's the right price, right? So yeah, it's a tricky issue. We try to share, there's this organization called Trees SC that tries to share across the state on who's doing it well. The county of Greenville, we almost had something passed with the UDO that was going to allow, if you saved large trees like 24-inch caliper, if you saved those, then you would be allowed to build more houses. So like save trees, but more density. And that was kind of like an incentive. In some areas, only incentives are going to work. In other areas, actual laws and enforcement are what's going to work. And it's all whatever the political environment is. So part of when Katie, in the little book, she goes before the council of elders or whatever. She did that. She went before Greenville County Council, and they didn't get anywhere near where they thought they should get. So they said, you know what, I'm going to start an organization called Trees Greenville, and we're just going to plant trees no matter what they do. And we're going to kind of influence from the bottom up. So it's a good question. It's tricky. And that's the best I can answer it.
We do have in the past years ago. it was sort of ironic, 'cause when it passed, afterwards, one of the councilmen said, I voted the wrong way. I voted for it." So here it is now.
Yeah, we're looking at it, but I don't know the details. So it's not what we want.
Website. I think it requires placement of trees, replace trees and they got that.
Yeah, and it's about parking lots. About collecting trees, parking lots, check heat out of that.
Mm, mm. So Rick says parking lots. Yes.
But we've been battling this for a long time.
Well, now you got the riparian buffer passed and that was a win. So you can't develop up to the
That's
stream.
not about area, how to keep water, trees help keep the water. And so, but it's amazing, no matter what across the spectrum, how this little tree gain traction in the general mind about the value of trees. You know, and what role trees serve as far as flood control, you know, cooling our water system, these type of things. You know, just, last 2 years, I've served on the Little River Basin Council, where we were determining how much water we're gonna have in the river for the next 50 years. When we started working on our recommendations, and I had trees in there, you know, about, value trees. Well, I missed the meeting, and they took it out.
Oh my
You
God.
know, took the trees out, about there any value for water quality in our river.
Yeah.
I said, so I went in full like guys and,
But like, don't you have to cut trees down on the water catchment on properties? They don't allow you to plant trees there because they're considered mass
yeah.
when they actually soak up water.
But they do suck up, you know, and so I had all the, I went in, I was all this ammunition, they thought about what they put the trees back in there. But, so, you know, all this really comes back to what I call a value system. You have to have a value for the natural things, natural place. And part of that is understanding the role that each thing serves, you know, what trees serve, what role does trees serve, right? And then so when you start putting things together and you realize that, you know, we're in. And that's where we have to get back to, is just, education.
Yeah, trees are good in many ways, yeah.
So this is what the name plant site does with Trees Upstate, is education, because it begins there, and it
Mhm.
is there. And so we always have to be doing a better job at it.
And my devil's walking stick that I got at the plant sale last year is doing well.
And it will last.
What do we have time for?
Yeah.
Not Ryan.
Yeah.
But
It's not even-
not Ryan.
He's been waiting. He's like.
I think we're out of time.
Yeah, I don't really know if I want to. But, and I apologize. All right,
I don't have to answer.
you don't have to, you don't have to repeat it, you can just move on.
Right.
All right, so. I believe it's correct in saying that the most depleted ecosystem of the upstate is the Piedmont Prairie. And so, assuming that's true, how does Trees Upstate take that into account at all when deciding planning spaces? Making sure that grasslands are protected and valued and not covered up just for the sake of creating additional tree. Do those conversations happen?
Well, I don't have those conversations, but they're legit conversations, and I think that's why we all work together in the conservation community. So
I can defend you. It's a good question. I had a prairie. Where they were. There are no such. In other words. They predominantly were urban.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Where there are no such.
And kind of by definition, there's not gonna be a whole lot of those areas to protect. So there's not gonna be a whole lot of those.
You know, places where we're.
There are.
Prairies. Natural and process got. That tree falls, so burning that prairie. But where you upstate, Trees Upstate, there were small, small areas of
Mhm.
or neighborhoods are eliminating these heat islands, et cetera.
Mhm.
So there's really no conflict. They don't interact. No competition. The work you're talking about, which is very important. I can't think of any other line.
I have heard of the issue before, so I don't want to say I haven't heard of that, but I can't weigh in on it. I'm not as smart as you. We know each other, so that's why I'm messing with it.
Any last questions? For me? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. All right, this concludes our meeting. Don't forget to RSVP for the holiday party on December 9th. Thanks, everyone. If you don't mind, help stack chairs, get those organized. We really appreciate it. Thanks for joining. Bye, everyone on Zoom. The recording will be on YouTube in the next few days.
And I got